First of all, good morning. Welcome everyone to this month's CCG portion of the webinar here. Today we're going to cover intelligent capture for accounts payable. Let me lock that out there. All right. So yeah, like I said, welcome. We'll be highlighting the key points and takeaways of ICAP, or intelligent capture for accounts payable. What you're looking at now is the customer care group roster. With us today, it's just me, Paul, flying solo here. All right, just a couple of real quick housekeeping notes. All the attendees' audio has been muted. The chat box is available for you to type in any comments or questions that you may have during the presentation. And of course, if you could please complete the survey at the end of the webinar. We strongly leverage these in our decision making when it comes time to pick topics for the next webinars. So if there's something you'd like to see on a future date, just let us know. And as always, all of our previous webinars are available on our website. For today's agenda, we'll be covering what ICAP is, how it works, what it looks like, the benefits of ICAP, and what exactly the ICAP bundle all includes. All right, so what is ICAP anyway? Well, it's intelligent capture for accounts payable. The intelligent capture process is part of the overall OnBase scanning process and is essentially just an additional step within a scan queue. ICAP allows you to take your AP invoice documents and pull information directly off of those images and bring that information within your solution. ICAP accomplishes this by utilizing a set of predetermined fields on those AP documents that the OCR engine, OCR, that's Optical Character Recognition software, that the OCR engine will be looking at and pulling data from. Those fields are then mapped directly to existing keywords and document types within your solution. ICAP is such a powerful tool because through the use of data verification, you can train ICAP on where to look on a particular vendor's invoice for the appropriate data, causing ICAP to continuously improve over time based on that user feedback. So now let's take a more detailed look at how exactly the ICAP process works. Here we're looking at a graphical representation of all the phases involved with the ICAP process. Note that all the phases that show a small green person icon by them indicate phases that have an option for human interaction, whereas the gear icons indicate any automated portion. The first phase in this process is the scan and import phase. This can either be a manual or an automated phase. This is all based on how it is you are actually receiving your vendor invoices. Are they coming in via the mail, fax, email, etc.? An example of a manual method would be an end user scanning in a paper invoice they received in the mail themselves and initiating this process. Whereas an example of an automated portion of this would be for those invoices to be sent directly to an allocated email inbox via the Mailbox Importer. I'll cover the Mailbox Importer in a little more detail later. The next phase of the ICAP process is an optional phase, the quality assurance phase, and this is the only phase that does not have an automation option. This is usually put into place when the method of bringing in your AP invoice documents is by physically scanning them in. This step would enable end users to verify that the images coming in are usable. This is important because of ICAP's utilization of OCR software. To pull the data from these images, the data on the images themselves need to be readable so that OCR can extract. All right, so moving on to the identification phase. ICAP uses a pre-configured processing engine to identify invoices without the need to configure templates or rules to capture this data. There are some examples where batches can actually skip the identification phase due to pre-indexing, such as having a barcode with the vendor name and number associated with it. Most batches, however, will go through this identification process, where ICAP will search for a unique vendor identifier on the invoice itself. Those unique vendor identifiers are set up during the configuration portion, and existing invoices from that same vendor in your solution can be leveraged to establish those unique vendor identifiers as well. These identifiers are things such as a unique phone number, an email address, or other information unique to that vendor, because chances are the vendor's name within the invoice itself will be contained in some sort of embedded logo that OCR won't be able to identify correctly. So once a unique vendor has been identified, ICAP will then associate that invoice with that vendor's name and number. So now that that invoice has been assigned a vendor name and number, it can then be moved to the data extraction phase. This is where that specific vendor's learned or trained locations will then be leveraged to perform the actual data capture. Like I said before, ICAP constantly improves over time by continuing to incorporate feedback that has been associated to that vendor's invoices, enabling ICAP to use a set of learned locations that can be investigated to look for data such as PO number, invoice number, amount, and so on. Also, during this data capture phase, this extraction phase here, if there are still keyword values for the document type that have not been filled, ICAP can utilize tags to fill in the applicable keyword values. This works by having the OCR engine scan the document for all the possible ways that, for example, invoice number could be found on this invoice. Being spelled out completely, or invoice, £, things of that nature. This tag method is also leveraged to fill in keyword values if no unique vendor identifier was located during the identification phase. I'll get into a little more detail on that just a little bit later. Oh yes, my wonderful graphics. All right, so next up we have the verification phase here. And just like it sounds, this enables users to verify the data and the results that have been extracted for accuracy. But most importantly, this is where the training of the system comes into play. This is where that feedback that ICAP incorporates actually occurs. This allows you to improve the engine's capability to accurately index these documents by training the engine to find the correct values by performing this index verification. What this means is that by end users confirming or correcting these indexing results, you are actively providing the engine with feedback on how effective its indexing logic for a particular vendor's invoice was. The engine will then incorporate that feedback when processing other batches from that same vendor. Also, as you can see, it shows there is an option here for an automation portion of this phase as well. An example of this would be to send these results to a workflow, which could then compare the data extracted from the invoice to the data of the original purchase order that exists in OnBase to ensure that that information and those values match, which would also help feed into that constant improval of ICAP. And transversely, if that data doesn't match, workflow could then be leveraged to attach a note to that invoice and send it to an exception queue for user intervention. So the final phase of the ICAP process is the actual committing of your documents to be stored in your OnBase system. Similar to any existing batch process you may already be using, such as Dept or Cold. So that was a real high level on each phase of this ICAP process. So now that we've gone over all the phases of the ICAP process, I want to show you what a batch of invoices moving through a configured ICAP system actually looks like. For this demonstration, we'll be executing phase 1 of the ICAP process manually. So we're going to navigate to batch scanning, and we're going to go ahead and sweep a batch to the vendor invoices scan queue. We're going to do this via a sweep from directory. I'll go ahead and select sweep. So now that the invoices have been brought in, we are now in phase 2 of the ICAP process, the quality assurance phase. We're presented with the invoices in a hit list, and they appear in this viewer pane below here as well. At this point, we could go through each image and ensure that they're usable for the OCR engine. Although we, oops, oh man, that is not what I meant to do. Well, I think it happened right away. Sorry about that. I should not have scrolled. All right, so once we get back to where we left off, we sweep in those batches. We get to the quality assurance phase, phase 2, where we can verify all the images that came in on these invoices are usable, are readable, that OCR can interact with them. But yeah, so we're going to assume that these are all good, and we're going to go ahead and just navigate to the document. All right. So yeah, so we'll just go to the batch processing right away. So first thing we're going to do here is refresh the list. And as you can see, the batch that we have just swept in and QA'd is now in the Intelligent Capture for AP in progress queue. This is where both phases 3 and 4, the identification and data extraction phases, will be performed on these invoices themselves. Both of these phases are completely automated. So ICAP currently is searching for those unique vendor identifiers on this batch of invoices. Once found, the learned locations of that vendor can then be leveraged during the data extraction phase, and the keyword values will be captured. Seeing as though this was a small batch, this should already be done. So we go ahead and refresh our list, and you'll see that they did appear in our awaiting commit phase. This, at a glance, also tells me that ICAP was able to associate each of these invoices to a known vendor. Because if it hadn't, then this batch would have ended up in the indexing in progress queue, which is kind of like our exceptions queue in the ICAP process. Okay, so let's go ahead and navigate to this batch. So we'll select the batch. And we can see from this hit list, just right away, once again, at a glance, that ICAP has already captured some keyword values because the auto name strings have been populated. And to verify that all the applicable keywords have been captured, we can navigate to the Document tab and select Keywords. Simply right-clicking on the document and selecting keywords works as well. So as you can see, all the needed data for this invoice has been captured. PO number, vendor name, invoice number, amount, and so on. And so that right there, in a little less than 2 minutes, by utilizing ICAP, we've just brought in a batch of vendor invoices into our OnBase solution. They've all been correctly indexed and are now ready to be stored. And so what I didn't cover right there was that data verification phase, which I mentioned before was, that real important phase. That's where ICAP is actually, learning and constantly improving and really just being the great tool that it is. So yeah, that was a good example of what things could look like once fully configured and no data errors occurred. So we're going to go ahead and cover a little more detail about what is happening behind the scenes with the identification, data extraction, and verification phases. What you're about to see is actually a capture of an excellent training video that's available to anyone with a premium subscription to training.onbase.com. Okay, so first thing, the software is going to check if the vendor number is already populated with a keyword value. If so, then the invoice can skip straight to the identification phase and go to the data capture server for processing. And so this, like I mentioned before, how is it that there's a vendor invoice number already assigned? Well, this can occur, via pre-indexing. And so that can be done manually. If an organization has a user, go ahead and enter in that vendor name, vendor number, before actually initiating phase 1. Or like I mentioned before, you could scan a barcode that's been associated to the vendor name and vendor number. Most batches, however, that come through are probably going to go through this identification phase. ICAP will use the information provided when we configured the unique vendor identifiers. And this illustrates nicely, OCR looking for on that document for these unique vendor identifiers, such as phone, vendor email, vendor URL. And it's also illustrates very nicely that OCR, it doesn't play very nice with extrapolating data from embedded image logos. Okay, so using this information, ICAP will check to see if a unique vendor has been identified. So for this vendor phone, are we able to assign a unique vendor based on that unique vendor identifier? And so if it has, Star Enterprises, it'll go ahead and send it over to the data capture phase. This, via the verification phase, users can confirm that, yes, ICAP, you pulled the correct information. And like I mentioned before, ICAP is constantly improving over time. So this illustrates, your vendor email, you looked for it there, but I need you to start looking for these invoices for this vendor. I need you to start looking there for vendor email. And then ICAP will incorporate that into its data extraction process for other invoices for the same vendor. After the learned data is applied, there may be some remaining keywords that still need to be populated. ICAP will continue to scan the document for tags. Like I mentioned earlier, tags are all the possible ways that information could be found on this invoice themselves. Whether, invoice, £, or invoice number completely spelled out. And so on this note, this is why I really wanted to show this, because there are times when ICAP is unable to identify a unique vendor for that invoice. None of the identifiers that it was able to pull out the invoice match any known vendors that we've programmed into this system. Or some of the information was generic and you actually ended up with several matches for that identification information. And so ICAP won't assign a specific vendor to an invoice that have more than one option. And so the extraction summary screen will really clarify which situation applies to the invoices that have been brought into your system where a unique vendor wasn't ID'd. And so like I mentioned before, that indexing, these batches will hit this indexing in progress queue, and then you can go there, you can view this extraction summary and really kind of get to the bottom of what just happened. And just to give you a chance to see what the data verification phase actually looks like, I'm not going to get into the nuts and bolts of setting these fields and allocating these locations and where to look. But, so I really wanted to demonstrate, this is the same interface, indexing interface that you're already familiar with. You have these invoice number, PO number, are all highlighted in green. You can select them. They're highlighted, in green on the document. And this is that data verification phase. So yes, was that correct? And click it. It's going to move you there. Was that correct? Was that correct? And by really building enough kind of quantifiable data of validating that the OCR process was accurate, and assuming that the vendor didn't change his invoice layout, this data verification, we can just go right to some auto commit and things of that nature. All right, so now that we know how the ICAP process works and we've seen a little bit of what it looks like, let's go ahead and cover some of the benefits of incorporating ICAP into your organization. So besides all of the obvious advantages of leveraging this type of automation into your processes, I wanted to highlight that all the benefits around introducing ICAP into your solution are geared towards improving your overall vendor invoice processing. ICAP allows for a higher volume of documents to be ingested, for those same documents to be accurately indexed. Audit trails via transaction reports are now available. And then once these invoices are in OnBase, they can fall into your document retention plan, security keywords can be applied, and just really all those benefits of having documents in OnBase. But most importantly, there's the immediate return on investment that comes from incorporating ICAP. By utilizing OCR, the human element is removed from the grind of the indexing process. No longer will employees be tasked with manually entering in values on a page, And this is really freeing up their time for more valuable activities within your organization. So the ICAP product comes as a bundle. This is a volume-based product. There's certain tiers, and this is all based on the number of invoices that you ingest annually. And so that's not to say the number of pages. Some invoices can be multiple pages. This is looking at the actual real number of invoices that your system is ingesting daily. And you can go ahead and get this ICAP bundle, and your account representative can definitely get a lot more granular on what that's going to look like for you and your specific situation. So at a high level, what does this bundle mean for you? Well, it includes multiple modules that can not only be used within your ICAP process, but can be applied to your entire solution as well. So let's go ahead and take a look. So fax integration. Although this technology is used less and less these days, it is still used by some vendors to transmit copies of invoices out to their customers. So a fax integration module is included within the ICAP bundle. There are the obvious drawbacks of relying on a fax-based system, such as printing, scanning fax documents is costly, time-consuming. Any paper-based process is liable to having things getting lost and doesn't allow for a clear audit trail. And on top of that, these fax documents often need to be stored and shredded, taking up valuable time and resources. With this integration, all of your fax-based invoicing will be processed digitally and securely. A common example of this would be something like WriteFax integration. So invoices being distributed via email has become a very common practice in today's business world. Bringing invoices in through email is made easy with the Mailbox Importer. You simply allocate a dedicated email inbox as your AP point of entry, and then distribute that email address to your vendors for invoicing. For example, you have AP invoice at yourcompany.com, or really whatever will kind of meet your needs there. And so once invoices are sent to this address, they'll be fed directly into your ICAP solution and kick off phase one of this ICAP process and initiate getting these invoices into your system, getting them indexed, getting them stored. And so, as I mentioned before, Mailbox Importer, you can use it for a lot more than just getting your invoices into your system. It's one of those nice modules that can be used in other areas, leveraged in other areas as well. And of course, there's the OCR engine that operates on the data capture server that comes with the actual ICAP bundle as well. But yeah, so most excitingly, yes, that is correct. The ICAP bundle includes the Reporting Dashboards module, which can be used to not only leverage and interpret all of the data within your OnBase solution to include anything in regards to ICAP, but can also be pointed at data sources that exist outside of OnBase as well. Reporting Dashboards is an extremely powerful, easy to configure, easy to use tool, and it can quickly become an invaluable asset to any organization. As you can tell, I get really excited when I start to talk about all the ways that reporting dashboards can be leveraged to be just a huge benefit to literally any aspect of an organization. But that would be, and actually already has been, a previous webinar topic in and of its own, which of course you can always go out and find by navigating to our website. So real quick at a high level, reporting dashboards gives organizations immediate visibility into system and business health. Users can create and share dashboards highlighting business data that's important to them without the need to engage IT resources. Dashboards can present data in a variety of graphical formats, including charts, graphs, scorecards, maps, and more. Interactive features then allow users to easily monitor performance and analyze trends in real time. Dashboards can be accessed from Unity and web clients, and in addition to standard web browsers, mobile browsers can be accessed as well, providing an even greater level of accessibility into your data. All of this is geared with the purpose of being able to quickly view and interpret relevant data and make proactive business decisions. So on that note of reporting dashboards, I did want to show some examples of what some pre-configured dashboards that can be incorporated into your ICAP can look like. And you can really monitor any aspect of the invoice as it's moving through this process or is already all the way out of the process. So as you can see, you can have as much oversight on any level of every invoice within your system. AP invoices in progress, AP past due invoices, and by applying filters and really those interactive features that I mentioned earlier, you can get as granular or as high level on this data as what meets your needs, and so on. All right, so that concludes today's webinar. Are there any questions or comments out there in the chat window that we can address real quick? So while I wait for anything to come in, oops, there it is, the thank you slide. Wonderful. And of course, yeah, everyone, yeah, thank you for your time. And of course, feel free to reach out anytime you have any additional questions or like a training session. We're here, we're always available. Contact information on the screen. Thank you.